Hi, thank you for tuning in. My name is Dr. Amber Bryant, and I'm a project manager at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. More specifically, I work for the Inter-university Consortium for Political and Social Research, ICPSR, on the Peers Data Hub team, the partnership for expanding education research in STEM. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Huriya Jabbar, an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Jabbar's research focuses on education policy and leadership. Her published scholarship explores the multiple facets of market-based K-12 education and school choice policies. If you are not aware, New Orleans is a central location when discussing these topics because after Hurricane Katrina, the parish switched to 100% market-based schools. Many other states, including Michigan, recently changed policies to further promote market-based education by removing charter school caps for their states and districts. Dr. Jabbar discusses these occurrences more heavily in her published works. Dr. Jabbar, thank you so much for joining us to discuss this topic of market-based education. And if it's okay with you, I'm just going to jump right in with our questions for today.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so for the general population, can you explain to us what market-based education is and how it shows up in K-12 compared to higher education environments?
Yeah, so when I think of markets and education, I think about two forces that are kind of shaping urban education. One is marketization, or how market-driven assumptions influence the actions of teachers, school leaders, and students. But there's also privatization, which is how private sector actors use their power to influence public education. And these are often related in that policies that introduce market mechanisms sometimes rely on private actors. So for example, you mentioned charter schools. Those are privately run operators running public schools. And so there's an element of both choice and markets as well as privatization. And we've seen these types of examples in education through policies that expand school markets through choice, incentives, and competition. And over the past several decades, that's really shifted the landscape of public education. And these reforms are really designed to pressure school actors to demonstrate gains in achievement, to compete with each other, and to attract and retain students and teachers.
So what brought you personally, I guess, to this research topic?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have a background in economics, and so I think I've always been interested in markets and market-based approaches. I did always have a somewhat critical view of markets, though. I remember even in my first Econ 101 course in college, just really questioning some of the underlying assumptions around how markets work and how people make decisions. And I remember even my first paper in college was on school vouchers and just kind of questioning that kind of privatized approach to education. And so I guess I've always been interested in the interaction between markets and equity, and what types of regulations or oversight are necessary to ensure that in a market-based setting, everyone has equal access and opportunity.
Yeah. So, I guess not to get too far into our opinions here, but in your research, are you finding it to be beneficial or detrimental to the education system to have a market-based approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think it's one that we are still just grappling with as a field. I mean, my questions and my interest in this come from a concern about, especially, kind of unfettered markets, which we know from in education and beyond education, do not lead to equitable outcomes. And I think the question that I have is, does school choice does it simply reproduce inequities that we already see in the education system? or does it really exacerbate inequities? And then beyond that, what can we do to reduce existing inequities in the system? So I think a lot of the more recent research, I think, in addition to just documenting inequities where they exist or places where school choice has improved outcomes, is really trying to go beyond that now and to think about under what conditions is school choice or other market-based reforms more or less likely to reproduce, exacerbate, or reduce existing inequities.
Gotcha. So I know that some of your research covers school leaders and teachers and their responses to school choice policies. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so you mentioned New Orleans, and that's one place I've studied these issues in post-Katrina New Orleans, which, as you mentioned, has the highest concentration of charter schools in the nation. It's now 100%. And over the past now almost decade, I've been investigating school leaders' perceptions of competition and their responses to competition. And this research really showed that school leaders in New Orleans, they have experienced especially strong market pressures to compete for students because of school choice policies, but that their responses often reinforced inequities in an already kind of unequal marketplace. And so what I found, for example, was that some principals under this combined pressure to increase enrollment and test scores used targeted marketing and recruitment programs to select particular types of students, usually those who were affluent or already higher performing. And then beyond that, I've looked at teacher labor markets in large urban districts that have widespread school choice. As I was doing this research on school leaders in New Orleans, it became clear that in choice-heavy cities, teachers have multiple organizational options from which to choose as well. In multiple charter schools rather than a traditional school district. And this can really change the nature of teacher labor markets. And so this work I did in New Orleans, but also in San Antonio and Detroit. And these are also cities that have high charter school concentrations. And through interviews with almost 200 teachers across these sites, we were trying to understand how teacher mobility operates in these contexts with where teachers have many job choices and the implications for equity. And we found that in places with many charter schools, it can create a stratified teacher labor market, and also that the role of social networks played a much greater role in these settings, which has implications for equal access to job opportunities.
Got it. So when you're saying equity for schools and with students, are you talking about what is available, the accessibility as far as quality, like for what students have access to in that sense?
Yeah. So I think the underlying assumption of school choice is that parents, families, students are the ones choosing, right? And they have access to a selection of schools, any school in the city, and go through some kind of process to enroll. And what some of my research and others has shown is that that's not how it always plays out, and that there are some barriers for students. Sometimes they're structural in terms of transportation or accessibility or just the kind of bureaucratic process of enrolling in the schools. But there are also sometimes school leaders who purposefully, screen out students or make it more difficult for them to enroll in schools. And so it kind of goes in, counter to the idea of school choice being really choice on the part of families and students.
Got it. That's very interesting to me because it's really on the front end. It's before we even get to discussing outcomes. The equity here that you're mentioning has to do with just even access to these to certain types of schools before we even talk about the inequities that we see in the outcomes as far as performance and standardized testing. So I like the fact that it has that prevention instead of treatment type of angle to it. So it's good. One last question for you before we let you go today. For researchers who are interested in learning more about this topic, where should they start? How do they join the conversation that's currently going on in scholarship?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many excellent scholars writing about market-based reforms and privatization. And I think to your point, just before this question, I think it is helpful to think not only about the effects of these reforms, for which people interested in this topic could turn to economists and other quantitative scholars in education who've looked at the impact of, for example, charter schools on student outcomes. But I think it's also important to look at these kind of social and political dimensions. And there's a lot of great work by people in the politics of education and in sociology on these topics. And in terms of that, like where the conversation is right now, I think there is a lot of discussion around school choice and equity for different marginalized populations. And I think how school choice shapes access to educational opportunities for students, as well as work on how the design of choice policies varies across sites and what that can tell us about, under what conditions choice does or does not lead to more or less equitable outcomes. And I think that's kind of where the field is moving towards more than just, does choice in whatever form have a positive or negative impact, to, how and why and under what conditions and for whom.
That is so great. You said a lot in that last response that people can really dig into. It sounds like you're saying like all the answers aren't figured out yet. So it's definitely still an area where people can explore more, and definitely a growing area of research.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you again for your time and being with us today, Dr. Jabbar. I always feel like we could go on for a lot longer on these topics. So I definitely appreciate you kind of getting us started. And I hope this kind of ignites some energy and maybe some researchers and some scholars who wants to continue this conversation, just hearing us speak about it today. So listeners, if you want to get in touch with Dr. Jabbar, or if you have any questions, you can follow her work on Google Scholar or reach out through her university emails. I'll link in the description of her Google Scholar so you can check out some of her published works that may help you kind of continue to explore in this direction. So again, thank you so much for this.
Thank you.